Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast, everyone. My name is Elijah. I'm here to talk about the Baltimore Orioles as I usually am, and I'm in a slightly better mood because I just watched them beat the Nationals 2-1. We're not going to talk about the rest of the National Series. um, we're particularly not going to talk about the umpires. We're not going to talk about Game One in particular. It's really we're gonna I was gonna say we're gonna try to keep it positive today. That's not even necessarily true because I'm gonna talk to you about Charlie Morton. Jesse alluded to a potential deep dive coming. This is it. I think it's time to talk about him. I think it's time to look at what the heck is going on. For those of us following on YouTube, you guys can see I've got movement plots pulled up. I'm ready to dig into data here. Um, the sponsor of our show today is uh, the Warehouse Pod. We are here bringing it to you, and yeah, that's all I got. Let's get into it. Um, I think the first place to start, right, is Charlie Morton is famous. You can call him Uncle Charlie, uh, because the thing that he does is he throws this mean curveball, right? And for whatever reason this year, it's just not so mean. Hitters are hitting an even 400 off of it. They are slugging 800 off of it. The average exit velocity off of this pitch is 94.6 miles an hour. Average launch angle is at 12 degrees. I did a quick StatCast search earlier today for every ball between 94 and 95 miles an hour off the bat and 11 to 13 degree launch angle. Hitters hit 905 on these balls, right? This is a really hard line drive into the outfield. I saw the average hit distance there was about 200 feet. It is in front of outfielders, over the top of infielders' heads. This is just like the average ball hit anytime they make contact with a curveball is just this like absolute seed into the outfield. Again, 94.6 miles an hour at a 12-degree launch angle. It's just not good. Um, yeah, so in 2024, again, there were 158 of these hitters hit 905, slugged 1044. I think it's kind of interesting, like the ISO there, the slugging minus the batting average kind of shows you that this isn't necessarily something that will always go for a double. It's certainly never going to be a home run. This is a relatively low line drive, but it just is very repeatably a hit. So but I should caveat that, and I should say that hitters are certainly slugging off of the curveball. I was just giving you the average, so that is the average thing that happens. Hitters off of Charlie Morton's curveball again are slugging 800, so certainly they are doing damage against it. Um, to just look at the other pitches and recap real quick. His sinker hitters are batting 444 off of the sinker. You thought the 400 batting average off of the curveball was the worst. No, hitters are batting 444 off the sinker. They are slugging 610, like approaching Cedric Mullins levels right now. The exit velocity is even higher at 97 and a half off the bat, off of an average sinker. Although I will say, to his credit, he is still inducing ground balls here. The average launch angle off of these is only -3, so a lot of ground balls, but still a lot of hard contact. That 610 slugging shows you that they absolutely are able to elevate the bad ones. Um, and then the other pitch that's really getting beat up is the cutter. Hitters are batting 455 off of it. Yes, that batting average went up again from 400 to 444 to 455. But that said, they're not doing as much damage off of the cutter. Slugging is only 545, only I say. Um, and he actually has induced some weak contact there. The average exit velocities are much lower on the cutter. Um, but the changeup has not had too much damage done against it. Like hitters are still hitting 385, don't get me wrong. But relatively, that's not our enemy here. And his four seam is surprisingly performing kind of well. Hitters are only hitting 143 off of it. Average launch angle is through the roof. He's getting a lot of pop flies. He's getting whiffs at almost a 30% rate on it, just over 28%. And that's really pretty good for a four seam fastball. And that was one thing that kind of piqued my interest here. I said, okay, so the mantra of this aging guy with fading stuff, that's just not really backed up by data. If that were the case, right, this four seam would be getting destroyed. It's just the guy doesn't really have it anymore. I've got movement plots for those of you watching along on YouTube plotted here. And you can see, I mean, the movement profiles are very similar to what they were last year, with one notable difference I'll get into in a second. But, you know, his stuff is not really diminishing. And we can go ahead and we can look at, uh, like what actual stuff models are saying. Stuff Plus has him. This is kind of interesting. So the four seam fastball is actually 6% better than it was last year. The sinker 1% better, cutter 3% worse. The curveball is about 5% worse. I'll get into what I think that is, what that's all about. Changeup is 2% worse. So because he throws the curveball so much, and that's the thing that's seen the largest change, his overall stuff plus has gone down 3%, from 98 to 95. So I don't necessarily want to say, that it's necessarily that the stuff hasn't gone anywhere, but I think that's really dominated by a change that he's made in the curveball. And I should say, like, the change he's made in the curveball is not like that it is worse stuff necessarily. A lot of these stuff models, they'll go ahead and uh, one of the factors that plays into it is how a pitch interacts with the primary fastball, how it interacts with the pitch that you are going to like most often attack the zone with. And what's interesting about Morton here is he's kind of had two shifts, right? So if you go ahead and you look at movement profile for his curveball, this year he's throwing it about 7/10 of a mile an hour slower than he did last year, but he's getting just about the same vertical movement, and he's getting over an inch and a half more of horizontal movement. So it's a slightly bigger shape at a slightly slower speed. If you check out spin rates, the spin rate is actually a very slight bit higher this year. This is not like, the curveball is kind of fading on him. He can't get the same action on it. That's not it. He's actually getting more total movement than he did last year, albeit throwing it a very slight bit slower. So that's kind of interesting. But that, and again, remember I said difference to the fastball, that kind of then pointed me back toward the four seam fastball, the fastball that he's going to attack the zone with most often. And if you look at the four seam, this is really the only noticeable change in movement profile here. I think it's really fascinating. The Orioles have made this a more vertical four seam. He throws it about a half mile an hour slower, which I think is probably because, essentially, again, for those watching on YouTube, you can see I have the arm angles plotted here. For those not watching, the four seam that he was throwing last year is more in line with his arm slot. And basically, what that means is as he is like actually whipping his arm through and extending through the ball, if he's keeping it in line with his arm slot, that means he can stay behind it and really backspin it more. Um, and I think that's the very simple explanation. If he wants to get hop on this, right, he needs to be turning his wrist a little bit. I guess, from this low arm angle, he needs to be turning his wrist a little bit and actually getting that hop on the ball if you want to get that good Magnus effect, that good backspin working for you. So it makes sense that he's throwing it a slight bit slower. And I think this was a conscious change from the Orioles, to go ahead and try to make this a more hoppy pitch. And I think what that does, however, is it creates more separation from the shape of the curveball. If he wants to be peppering the curveball at the bottom of the zone and it's a largely kind of sweepy curveball because of his low arm slot, um, I think that anything that's hopping out of the hand is just going to look that little bit more different. Um, so again, like to reiterate, the four seam stuff is actually playing pretty well right now. I can zoom down to it, but he, has a 143 batting average on it. Slugging is still over 400. I mean, like he's giving up hits on everything. He's given up some amount of damage on everything, but he is, like the average launch angle against it again is 39 degrees. Spin is up 100 RPM from last year. So, he's getting this nice hoppy fastball. Hitters are swinging and missing 9% more than they did last year. He's largely turned this into a swing and miss pitch at the top of the zone. And I think that was a very intentional thing that the Orioles were trying to do. Now, to kind of echo that, I'm going to scroll to some locations, the locations of all these pitches. And I think that Morton, you'll be able to see pretty clearly. I'm reorganizing my screen so we can see these a bit more effectively here. Um, but I think you'll be able to see pretty clearly that Morton is very much throwing his four seam higher in the zone. Um, Man, these just are not working with me. Okay, we'll go with that. So he's throwing the four seamer higher in the zone. And again, for a hoppy fastball, when he was back with the Astros, this was what they turned him into. They turned him into high speed or high spin, good velocity right at the top of the zone and snapping off a huge curveball. And I think this is what the Orioles are going for, right? I think that this is the intent is you want to get hitters committing to velocity at the top of the zone or needing to sit and get caught out front on the breaking ball attacking the bottom of the zone. um, I think that largely the only difference in the only really significant difference in locations here is that four seam has moved to the top of the zone. And to me, I think that largely could point to the fact that there is just a larger delta between his two primary pitches, between the two things that he's going to attack you with most. It is easier to tell them apart. And in pitching, the entire purpose of what you do as a pitcher is you're trying to confuse the hitter. You are trying to go ahead and just make sure that they cannot make a comfortable decision. You want to make sure that they cannot go ahead and have full confidence in what they're swinging at. You want to delay how much you want to delay when they can make a decision by making sure that your pitches look as much alike as they can. We saw Cade Povich roll through almost 7 innings tonight. Um, we saw him roll through almost 7 innings tonight because he's just throwing the kitchen sink, right? He didn't even throw that many fastballs, but you keep hitters guessing and you end up like having James Wood sitting on a sweeper outside and he just takes a fastball middle out when James Wood is one of the best, backside hitting to the opposite field hitters in the entire game of baseball. But he's just watching a 92-mile-an-hour fastball on the outside part of the plate. That's because Cade Povich is tunneling well. He's like, he's keeping these shapes consistent. He's keeping hitters guessing. And you have people looking kind of silly like that, and that's what happens. So that's the entire intent of pitching, is going ahead and trying to get hitters confused. Um, and basically, earlier out of the hand, I think right now, because this four seam is sitting at the top of the zone in a way that it did not. And I don't want to say that like the heart of the zone location is necessarily the most desirable thing, but well, this is actually a good way. This is a good example here. So, very recently, I heard a podcast. The pitcher over like all of stat tracking era, or I'm sorry, all of over all of the pitch tracking era, where we could tell these locations really accurately. The pitcher who has had the most middle fastballs is Roki Sasaki, as a percentage, of course. Um, but he's still, he's struggled a little bit, but he's still somewhat effective throwing that fastball in the middle of the zone because it tunnels with the splitter at that height, right? Because his splitter, when that thing is tumbling, falling off the table, it's starting right there in the middle of the zone, and that's where it ends up below. And effectively, what he's doing, you know, while his fastball in a vacuum might be more effective at the top of the zone, because his splitter looks like it comes out at the middle of the zone, you're going to delay the hitter's decision making if you keep all your pitches in one single tunnel. That's the whole concept of tunneling, as first publicized or publicized, as first popularized. That's what I'm trying to say by Rob Friedman by Pitching Ninja. That is the concept of tunneling, right? It's making your stuff look like the same thing until it's not. Um, and you're trying to extend that as long as you can, make that really, really look like the same thing, as long as physically possible. And I think that's what Charlie Morton is really missing here. Um, I I don't want to like totally ignore the fact that like his sinker locations like the red spots are just like middle of the zone, slightly to his arm side. The cutter locations are very much in the heart of the zone. This is like it's not totally true that all of the locations have been phenomenal. And again, if I uh, go back to Fangraphs here and you look at location, he's got an 88 location plus right now. It's certainly not a fan of the way he's attacking the zone because he's effectively not. But again, I think that this four seam change that the Orioles made, it certainly gave him a more effective four seam fastball. I think that's unequivocally true. Again, hitters were whiffing 19% of the time last year. They're whiffing 28% of the time this year. Um, the four seam fastball in a vacuum is a better pitch, but it does not work with Charlie Martin's curveball in the same way that it did previously. It did not, I think that they're able to see the hump because it's coming out of the tunnel just a little bit lower than his four seam fastball is. And those two pitches are still accounting for, let's see, 65, 66% of the pitches he throws. So, hitters can largely sit on one of those two things. And then when he's not throwing those two, again, like the cutter locations are pretty much middle of the plate. The sinker locations are pretty much middle of the plate. He's throwing pretty hittable stuff besides that. And the two pitches he needs to get you with are the four seam and the curveball. Those are the two that have near 30% whiff rates. Yes, even though the curveball is still like giving up so much damage and looks like such a weakness right now, one in every three that hitters swing at, they still miss. It like the thing is an effective pitch in a vacuum. The four seam is an effective pitch in a vacuum. These things are just not playing well together right now. Um, I think there have been a couple other situations where I think you could argue that, the curveball command has not been as good. That isn't as well, I guess, represented in the data. Like the amount of time that he's throwing it in the zone is just a couple percent different than it was last year. The amount of time that he's attacking different zones, it's all relatively similar to it was last year. I think that the biggest thing is truly, uh, like decision making on when to throw certain pitches. We have seen there was an at bat against Ellie De La Cruz where he was ahead 1-2 and then went with three curveballs to walk him. I understand it's your best pitch, but you had Ellie make kind of a poor swing on a changeup at one point. He kind of was late, fouled off a changeup, and then you attack him with the curveball and you miss three times. There is such thing as pitch fatigue. This is a pretty well studied and well documented thing. The more times that you throw a pitch, the more times that a hitter sees it, the worse chance you have of succeeding with it. And I think that shows really well we saw Cedric Mullins have like a 9 pitch at bat against Mackenzie Gore. We've seen him grind out a couple at bats this year. And then ultimately end them with success. Like the longer that net bat goes, I remember Anthony Santander had like a 14 pitch at bat last year. The longer an at bat goes, the better chance of success a hitter has because they have seen everything coming out of your hand. It is fresh in their mind. They understand kind of what the trajectory of each pitch is in the moment, and it's easier to recognize. When you make them go sit on the bench or play in the field for 3, 4 innings and then they come back up, you have a little bit of a reset as a pitcher. But again, like going at Ellie De La Cruz, who, has from the left side some of the best bat speed in the world, obviously does a ton of damage, is this super electric player, and trying to essentially like trick him by doing the same thing three times in a row. It's just like I don't think that's an effective strategy. I don't like the way that the Orioles have necessarily used the curveball this year. That said, the curveball is being used like 8% less than it was last year. I think that, this is still his primary pitch. This is the thing that you want to attack with. Um, but I think he's gradually lost confidence in it because it does get smacked around. I don't want to sugarcoat it. The curveball has been smacked around in a way that other stuff has not been in a long while. Um, but I think that's because in his arsenal, largely nothing looks like it, right? If Charlie Morton wants to throw the sinker at you, he has to start it like very much on his glove side. We can go back up to the movement plot, but his sinker is going ahead and it's running 18 inches to his arm side, right? Charlie Morton needs to come at you with like again, if he wants to land that first strike, that has to start off the plate. The plate is only 17 inches wide. If it's going to run 18 inches to his arm side, it has to start like toward a left-handed hitter in order for him to land that as a strike. That will never be a pitch that will get confused for the curveball. The only things in that sense that could look even a little bit alike are a curveball off the plate to his glove side and a sinker off the plate to his arm side, where you kind of start both of them down the middle. Besides that, that will never really tunnel well with the curveball, and that's just a matter of fact. The changeup, will never tunnel well with the curveball. And so you have to kind of then step back and say, okay, if we have moved the four seam fastball in such a way that we are like using it in a different plane than the curveball is starting, what can we do from that point? Well, the thing that I look at is the pitch that I haven't mentioned. Obviously, he's not going to go ahead and tunnel his changeup with the curveball, but I think that it's the cutter. I think is maybe the operative pitch here, where if you up the usage of the cutter a little bit and you start playing kind of in the same zone, like you maybe work to the arm side, you backdoor some cutters, two lefties. I think that pitch can start to look like the curveball does coming out of the hand. Um, I think the other thing is maybe like there's a chance that you can get some depth on the curveball and you can turn it just, instead of this really, really slanted thing, if there's a way that you could even kill some spin, make it a little bit less efficient and bring it in and make it a little bit deeper as opposed to so sweepy, then there's a chance that it could play better with the more vertical fastball. Um, and you could start it a little bit higher and still effectively bring it down to the same spot at the low part of the zone. Once again, like it, the locations on the curveball, I don't want to say they've been spectacular, but it, it's, it's catching too much of the zone a little bit, but you can certainly see last year, he still operated kind of on a diagonal, from leaving some arm side to burying them down and in. And, he's largely operating on that same diagonal. I do think that the curveball has lived a little bit more up in the zone. Um, and I should just say that up in the zone, for those not looking on with me, up in the zone, I just mean in the sense of it is off the bottom line of the strike zone, thigh high as opposed to knee high. I don't really mean he's throwing it at the chest or anything like that. Um, but it's a really, this is what's so fascinating about pitching and what makes it such an interesting study in everything you look at is Charlie Morton is going ahead and, you know, in effect, I think by making his four seam an objectively better pitch, by making it a pitch that can induce whiffs, by throwing it in a location where less damage will be done against it, I think he has effectively neutered his best pitch. Um, and that's such a fascinating concept to me. Again, like the spin on his curveball is very slightly better, like 31 RPM better than it was last year. The total movement on the curveball, um, just to make sure I have the numbers right. Stand by, stand by, stand by. Oh my gosh, I scrolled too far. There we go. Total movement on the curveball, 19.7 inches last year, or I'm sorry, 19.7 inches this year, 18.3 last year. So he cut about a half mile an hour off of it, 7/10 of a mile an hour, and it's got an extra inch and a half of total movement on it. He is, going ahead and like getting a lot of action on this curveball, and something has changed such that it is way easier to recognize for hitters, and it's just not like a fearsome pitch. Last year, hitters batted 200 off of it, slugged 309. The 200 has doubled to 400. The 309 has more than doubled, more than two and a half, whatever the verb of two and a half is, to 800. And it's really, really a dire situation for Charlie Morton. I think that the Orioles need to make these tweaks quickly. Jesse alluded to it on the last podcast, but he's just fundamentally not effective right now. He is not an effective pitcher. Obviously, his ERA is 10 or something. It's unbelievable. I always dive right back into all. I always dive straight into the more complex numbers. But yeah, ERA is 10.89. It's just depressing, man. And he's pitched 20 and two-thirds innings. So this 10.89, obviously, nine means you've given up as many earned runs as you have in the innings pitched. This 10.89 means he's given up like 22 runs, more runs than strikeouts, as a matter of fact. That's got to be true. I need to pull up some standard stuff here. Stand by. Earned runs, 25 earned runs in 20 and two-thirds innings. So yeah, I mean, and 25 earned runs to 21 strikeouts as well. To give you some like normal proportions for that, last year he threw 167 innings and gave up 77 runs. So about eight times as many innings and about three times as many runs. This is just an awful situation. He is also, I mean, he's walking hitters at a ridiculous 13% clip. Um, it's just not tenable. And if your primary pitch, your curveball is going to be something that you are throwing in the zone, 40% of the time, um, double checking that for myself. Yeah, 39.2% of the time. It was 42% last year, right? He gets by on this level of deception that, keeps hitters guessing on what pitch is coming at them, the four seam or the curveball. Um, and he clearly does not have that this year. I think that's best shown by last year. Hitters swung at 37.5%, which is, three out of eight pitches or three out of eight curveballs that Charlie Morton threw outside the zone. This year, they're swinging at 24%, like closer to two out of eight, just below two out of eight pitches that he throws out of the zone. So he's throwing the curveball in the strike zone, out of the strike zone at pretty much the same rate. But the big difference is, again, one out of every eight of those curveballs, hitters are like, oh no, I saw that. I'm not swinging at that. Um, and I think that's really, really worrisome. Like this is a guy who lives and dies by this curveball again, and it is just not deceiving people in the way that it previously has. Um, so yeah, I am concerned about Charlie Morton. I think that, Jesse talked about this idea of an optional assignment. I don't know if Charlie Morton would take that. I would like to think, there's some Jose Abreu, I will go down to spring training complex and work on it, accept the optional assignment. Um, there's a chance the Orioles stash Charlie Morton in the pen and just try to hide him for a while. But, again, like with Dean Kramer and presumably Kyle Gibson would be the one who replaces Morton in the rotation. With Dean Kramer, Kyle Gibson, Brandon Young, who is just starting his big league career, the bullpen is going to get used. And so having somebody that you effectively do not want to pitch in the bullpen is a really bad way to handle a bullpen when that bullpen needs to be giving innings, needs to be called on regularly. That coupled with Felix Bautista being protected, not going on back-to-back days, these kinds of things can absolutely destroy a team. And I personally, I look at this team as a team that, as of right now, would be lucky to get to the playoffs. I am not of the mindset that the Orioles will have some huge lost year or something like that. You could say it's a failure of the year with the Orioles not making the playoffs, and I would absolutely agree with you. So it will be a lost year to an extent, but I do think that, when Kyle Bradish comes back, Grayson Rodriguez is healthy, Zach Eflin is healthy. Um, I think there's absolutely a world where this team finishes on an absolute tear, is the best team in the American League in the second half. I think all of those things can be true, and I think that we could also miss the playoffs because we just dug too much of a hole right now. I don't really see where we get relief. Zach Eflin is weeks away. Grayson Rodriguez is weeks away. Kyle Gibson is not that good at baseball. We all love him. I'm excited to have him. He will help the team. He will bring good vibes, but I just don't understand how this team immediately starts to turn around. And I think if you end April at 7 games under 500, which granted, I think we're only like 3 or 4 right now. So maybe that's a little bit extreme. If you end April at 5 games under 500, though, I do think that's a legitimate hole you need to climb out of. And that is not to say the Orioles cannot do it. It's just that the most reasonable outcome is they end the year with 85, 86 wins, slightly above 500. They were a good team. They were on a tear in the second half, and it just wasn't enough to make up for what has happened in this first month. Um, that is kind of my outlook on the team right now. It's not an overly positive one, but I think that we can still appreciate some good things this year. We can still, get to the end of the year and say we would beat any team in the playoffs right now besides the Dodgers. I think that's a very realistic outcome, and I think that I'll still like be looking at the team positively if that does come to pass. Now, to end on just a little bit of good news, let me catch my breath. Whew. Because I've been talking negatively for a minute here. So to you know, bring it back in a little bit, reel it in. Um, I want to talk about Cedric Mullins, the wonderful folks over at Fangraphs. I believe this was a Michael Bauman article. I'm scrolling. Michael Bauman, there we go. He wrote it today. He said, or he titled it, quote, "The biggest Cedric Mullins yet." He definitely poked fun at the diminutive Mullins. Uh, And what's so fascinating, I guess I should pull this up as I say it. Um, Cedric Mullins right now, in terms of strictly slugging percentage, is ninth in Major League Baseball. He is following the likes of Aaron Judge, Corbin Carroll, Pete Alonso, Kyle Tucker, Jonathan Aranda, who Orioles fans be terrified at Aranda for the next X number of years in Tampa. Um, Fernando Tatis, Ben Rice, who obviously has been a menace with the torpedo bats, Tyler Soderstrom, who has caught fire for the A's, and then Cedric Mullins. He is at the top of the league. He is dominating. I mean, his OPS right now is 1023. That would be good enough for eighth in the league. He's dominant. I'm so thrilled about what Cedric Mullins is doing right now. We have alluded to it before, but I want to, in light of this article, give him his space because we really do need to appreciate it. And what Cedric is doing is so instructive about like instructive in explaining what the rest of the Orioles are not doing well. um, Cedric Mullins is more than anything else, he is pulling the ball in the air. And I should go ahead and bring up his Baseball Savant page because it'll show you he's pulling the ball in the air at twice the league average rate, um, which is unbelievable. 30% of the time he is pulling the ball in the air. And man, they just added this. There we go. So 31.6% of the time he's pulling the ball in the air. Again, that is double the league average rate. It's phenomenal. He has the best approach of anyone on the team. And to illustrate this, his 37.7% hard hit rate is not bad. Um, Man, I am sharing my screen, and so I'm unable to click the stuff at the top of the screen. Okay. Got my tabs organized. Apologies. So this 31.6% um, pull rate. I'm sorry. I got all caught up. Okay. So what's so amazing about, that pull rate is it shows like how it can compensate for something else. And what I'm alluding to here, his hard hit rate is in the 39th percentile. He doesn't hit the ball hard at a rate that even an average major leaguer does. His average exit velocity is exactly 50th percentile. He's just average in that sense. Um, but what he is doing, this launch angle sweet spot, this squared up percentage, those are both great numbers. 81st percentile for launch angle sweet spot, 68th percentile for the squared up. He doesn't have good bat speed. He doesn't hit the ball hard, but what he does is he maximizes what he gets out of his swing, and he does that by hitting the ball in effective ways. And that means pulling the ball in the air. Um, it really is that simple. And if you go back to the little Fangraphs article, again, I will link this in the description of the show. Every single year that Cedric Mullins has been a major leaguer, besides his 2021 season going into 2022. Uh, oh man, I'm bad at math. So there have been a couple hit or misses, but in 2018, he pulled the ball in the air 15.6% of the time. I think we all remember that Cedric Mullins, who was not a fear-inspiring um, offensive force, so to speak. That was the switch hitter who slapped the ball around and tried to leg it out. He was a Chandler Simpson light back in the day. Um, but now he is doing that almost twice that rate, 30.2% of the time. His ISO, which is again slugging minus your batting average, is over 300. That looks like a great batting average alone. That's because, again, his slugging percentage is huge right now. Um, and again, like the hard hit rates are not that great, the exit velocities are not that great, but he is pulling the ball in the air at the highest rate that he ever has. He is hitting at the highest average launch angle that he ever has, and his ground ball for fly or the number of ground balls he hits per every fly ball is at the lowest of his career also. So in every single way, he is hitting in the most effective way that he possibly can. And this is the only way to be a, kind of like not powerful guy and put up big numbers. And this is like what you see out of Alex Bregman. This is what you see out of Isaac Paredes, who the Astros replaced Alex Bregman with because he has this one very particular skill, and that is pulling the ball in the air. And the other thing that does is, or that factors into that is your ability to swing at the right pitches. Um, and Cedric Mullins has done that this year. The simple explanation, he's walked more than he's struck out. This would be the lowest strikeout rate of his career. And this would be, I'm double checking myself. Yeah, this would be over twice the highest walk rate of his career. So he is walking more than he's striking out. 19.3% walk rate, 18.2% K rate. But in the more like, I guess, microscopic sense, the amount of time that he's swinging at pitches outside of the zone, he swings at one in every five pitches outside of the zone. That is an extremely low rate. He is swinging inside the zone a little bit less than he did last year. Um, and so overall, he's just swinging a bit less. He's actually swinging at the lowest rate that he ever has, well, since his 2018 season, where he was a totally different human and still hit from the right side of the plate sometimes. Um, but yeah, I mean, he's being more discerning. He is not chasing pitches outside the zone, and he's hitting the ball in this wildly effective way. And again, that's just working out to this like absolutely dominant performance. We saw him with another RBI single today, battling Mackenzie Gore, who's this insanely tough lefty. Um, I mean, man, it's just like it is so beautiful to see. He's hitting almost 300. OBP is over 430, slugging 590, as of the time of me reading this. Uh, Man, it is so beautiful to see. And it is truly like, I, I mean, this is in some ways, sorry, in some ways, this is like more impressive than the Cedric Mullins we saw in 2021, I think. We didn't have bat speed then quite so much, but you know, back then he was walking at like a league average rate. Back then, still wasn't a ton of exit velocity, but that pulled air rate, let me go back to it, in 2021 was 21.4%, which is still certainly better than league average. It's still a good number. But this is 10% higher this year. This is like he is showing that with I think a little bit less of the tools, he is like he's 4 years older now. The sprint speed is down. Let me see. I can actually compare that. He's 89th percentile this year. He was 86th in 2021. Okay, maybe he hasn't lost a step. I apologize, Cedric. That's my bad. I just assumed. Like anyone who would assume that Charlie Morton has lost stuff would also be wrong. So I will take my L on that one. Cedric has actually sped up a very tiny bit. So shout out Cedric. Yeah, a tenth of a foot per second faster this year. Um, but yeah, like this is such a astoundingly talented dude. And hmm, it shows how cerebral he is. And he has taught himself, he has developed himself in such a way that like again, you could see it right here. This dude is 5'8", 175. Like, I could beat him up. I'm not athletic anymore. This is a tiny dude. Like this is somebody you would walk past on the street and you would not blink. You would never assume that this guy is this world-class athlete. But he is. He very, very much is. He's so unbelievably talented and he has developed himself in such a way that allows him to use the tools that he has in the absolute most effective way possible. I mean, this is so, so impressive. He is seeing pitches well. He is recognizing pitches. He is not chasing anything. That 21% chase rate that I talked about, that is in the 85th percentile. He's whiffing at only 17.5% of pitches. That's in the 87th percentile of the league. That walk rate I talked about, that is in the 98th percentile. He is so, so dominant right now in every way that reflects his approach at the plate, in every way that reflects having a plan, going up there and maximizing every single swing that you take. And I mean, like, if you had talked to me about the best case outcome for Cedric Mullins this year, I would have told you that, man, platoon outfielder, he's the strong side of the platoon. He's going to face righties. He could put up an 800 OPS against those righties, and that'll largely be it. He'll play some solid defense. That'll be it. I would have been totally happy with that. And everyone should have been happy with that. And it would have gotten him a solid 3-4 year contract, I think, coming out of this year. And he would have made some team very happy. This Cedric Mullins, and like, I should not say I don't think he will continue slugging 600. I don't think that's true. But this Cedric Mullins is showing himself as, I mean, able to recognize pitches against lefties in a way that, again, he took Mackenzie Gore to like a 9 pitch at bat and then hit an RBI single today. Um, he has shown that ability. He has shown the ability to draw walks, which with the sprint speed that is totally better than it was in 2021 as a 26-year-old. With that, he will be able to steal bases. He will still play good defense. He is phenomenal. He is such a complete player right now in a way that I don't think anybody reasonably could have predicted. If they did predict that, they just like the Orioles too much and they're not realistic about themselves. Uh, man, I like you have to just sit back and appreciate. And this is like in a way that you cannot fully capture. Like, I guess I could go look up, what percent of the Orioles team WAR he has, but I think Cedric Mullins has been more valuable to the Orioles than pretty much any team or any player on any team thus far this year. He is so disproportionately good in a time the rest of the lineup is struggling, in a time where, like I was joking a couple episodes ago about Heston Kjerstad's pulled fly ball rate, or just pull rate in general. Was joking about, yeah, we have joked about Ryan Mountcastle's inability to pull the ball in the air. Cedric Mullins is doing all the things that those guys should. If we want to go ahead and, like demonstrate for these other hitters how to approach an at bat, man, the example is right there. It is Cedric Mullins. It is Cedric Mullins. It is Cedric Mullins. I think before we kind of moved ourselves off of Twitter, like one of the most popular tweets we ever put out was after his cycle game, and just it was just like a picture of him and just said like, you could argue Adley, you could argue all this stuff, but I think that Cedric Mullins is truly the heart of this team. And this year, I think it's inarguable. I think that in the past, you could have argued at the time that I tweeted it out, but like Cedric Mullins has been here. He has been with the team. He means something to this city. And, like it cannot be stated enough that having a good black player on the Orioles, I think is so, so valuable. Um, and to be clear, like an American black player, I think in a city that is so, like densely populated, the demographics uh lean that way. Like I think it's important to have a super talented American black player on the Orioles. And Cedric Mullins has been that for years. He like took that mantle from Adam Jones. It was, I think, a larger thing than just taking over the center field position. But I think that it is in a very serious way. Like he means something to this fan base. On the broader scale, he means something that other players do not. We have had him for years. Again, I just told you he like came up with the Orioles for the first time in 2018, and we've seen him drop switch hitting. We have seen him, battle Crohn's disease. We have seen him do all of these incredible things and still turn himself into this amazing, amazing player. The dude is truly phenomenal. Never heard a bad word spoken about him in the clubhouse. Never heard really anything negative about him besides he was a bad switch hitter. So, with that, I think I'm gonna leave you. Shout out Cedric Mullins and definitely, man, Charlie Morton. Whew. I think I'm gonna leave that conversation where it was. I think I said enough about him. The Orioles win a game today. We take one of three from the Nationals. This was a good 2-1 game. Cade Povich dominated. Felix looked good in the last inning. Just had a hard time getting a ground ball at his shoestrings. He is 6'8". I will allow him being a bad fielder if he can continue to throw 98 miles an hour at the top of the zone. Um, yeah, man, you saw some good things today. There was some timely hitting. I don't think that the Orioles are in full form yet. The offense is not in full form yet. Tyler O'Neill missed today again with some neck stiffness. If his neck was not the size of my thighs, maybe it wouldn't be such a problem. But sure enough, here we are. Um, Need to get him going. Need to see him hitting some 480-foot bombs because that is what we're paying him for. And yeah, just generally, the rest of the lineup could stand to be a bit better. Learn a thing or two from Cedric Mullins, have an approach at the plate, pull some fly balls in the air. That is all I've got for you. My name is Elijah. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. As always, if you could be so kind, subscribe to the podcast, follow us, check us out on YouTube or your preferred podcasting platform. Always wave to YouTube. Um, and yeah, interact with us. We are over at Blue Sky most of the time nowadays. The Warehouse Pod at or the warehousepod.bsky.social. I always forget the end of that handle. You can email us thewarehousepod@gmail.com. You can catch us, me in particular, in the OTV patron Discord, chatting with those guys all the time. It's a bunch of people who really love baseball, and you get added content about the Baltimore Orioles and their minor league system from the brilliant people over at On the Verge. Speaking of On the Verge, they are our siblings, our sister podcasts, but they're all guys and we're all guys. So maybe brother podcast on the Believe Network, BLEAV. If you follow another team, Believe tries to put on at least one podcast, sometimes two, us being case in point, for every team in every major sport. Go check out believe.com, BLEAV, and check out the rest of the network. Hopefully, find some good stuff. We have interacted with a number of people over there, um, and they know ball. That's all I got for you. Everybody have a wonderful night. Hopefully, the Orioles will continue this stretch of, um, and by stretch, I mean one single game. Hopefully, they'll continue and make it a two-game stretch of good play. Um, I'm not holding my breath, but let's just make it through April. We'll see what happens in the second half. Everybody have a good one. Let's go, O's.